Morning, everybody. Thank you for coming at 7:45 in the morning. I know it is bright and early to talk about density bonus and math and development. And for some of you, that is what you wake up at 6 a.m. thinking about. But for others of you, you may not realize that we actually host these forums once a month. So it's actually the second Wednesday of each month on development topics. So if you're interested and you're not on our normal mailing list but heard about this from another angle, just know that the City of Walnut Creek hosts regular monthly opportunities to engage with either the policies that are going on, outside agencies, hot topics that are happening in the development world, or opportunities to meet city staff, many of whom are actually in the room right now. So that's part of the goal of why we have these, and that was how we were able to use this time for some discussion of our density bonus. So I just wanted to also give you, before I turn it over, an update on our economic development strategic plan. So for those of you who came last month, we've been doing a lot of feedback sessions lately. For those of you who came last month, we did a feedback session on some of the work that we're doing here at Walnut Creek on updating our economic development strategic plan. The last time that was updated was 2004. So it is definitely time for a refresh. And what we are doing is actually, initially we did a market study so that we would learn what the current state of affairs was before we made strategies about what we want the future of Walnut Creek to look like. We completed that market study, we brought it here, we got some initial feedback last month. We'll be back in either September or October, depending on exactly the consultant timeline, to get more feedback on the strategies. So keep an eye out for that, and please come back. We look forward to hearing from you on that topic. Anything from the crowd in terms of announcements or shared updates before we get started? All right, perfect. Well then, I will turn this over to Margot Ernst. She's our housing program manager, and she will introduce our speakers for today.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out so early to work with us on this project that I'm really excited has finally kicked off and that we're getting moving. So many of you know we've embarked on a process to update our density bonus ordinance. So some of it is because there's been a lot of changes in state law and we need to get things up to compliance, but we also really want to take this opportunity to engage the community, both the residents and particularly the developers, to be able to create an ordinance and a policy that can really work to help incentivize and create affordable housing in market rate projects to be able to be built concurrently, and to see what feedback you might have for us that can really get us to that like shared goal of your projects being feasible and getting what you need to be able to make that happen. So we hired an amazing consultant team, which is led by M Group. And so we have Milan Navaida from M Group here, who's going to be presenting. And then we also have BAE Economics. So we have Stephanie Hagar and Matt Kauta over here. They will be coming up at some point. So I'm just going to hand it over to Milan.
Yeah, that was my first question. If anyone hasn't signed in already, up at the front, you just raise your hand. We'll know where to start, and we can pass the sign-in sheet. It's not only good for your contact info, but we also want to get a sense of kind of who's in the room. So rather than doing the whole hand survey thing, if we fill out the sign-in, we'll get that info. So I appreciate that. Yeah, there are two handouts that aren't really critical for the flow of the meeting and information that you have to have. It's actually one survey that we have currently live online that we're collecting information for anyone who can't be here in this kind of a forum, and then also just a map that we've quickly mocked together so that if you have suggestions on geography, one of the questions we have for you later in the discussion is about geography. So you can mark up your map. Or even mark it up and let us know about some issues that you want to raise and let us know about as it relates to density bonus. So that's like scratch paper for you. So I'll take a step back and just introduce us a little bit deeper. So M Group, we are an urban planning firm. We work exclusively in the Bay Area, offices in the Southeast and North Bay. We do a lot of housing policy, a lot of housing related work. But we also do a lot of other things, master planning, other kinds of policy, and we also do a lot of staffing, development review, which is nice for this kind of a project because one, we have the analytical, theoretical, abstract policy analysis and policy development, experience, but we've also worked directly with developers on the ground trying to get projects through and seeing all the pains and aches that go along with that through the process. So we're very familiar in that, and are always looking for ways to streamline, and we like to bring those two aspects or perspectives together. We're currently working on a number of density bonus ordinance updates through the area, as a number of communities are going through what Walnut Creek is going through, and trying to get consistent with state law with all the new changes, but then also figure out a way how to make the program work better, I should say, for the communities. And BAE is I'm gonna ask them to come up because we have a slide specifically on their component of this, and they can talk a little bit more about their history at that point. So just 1 second. Generally speaking, I want to go really briefly through density bonus, just get everyone, reminded about what it is, what its basic elements are, but this isn't meant to be like a lesson. I think we're all relatively familiar with it, so we want to dive right into the discussion. To give you a sense of what all of this is for, we basically have this sort of a flow to our project, and it's getting our understanding of what the community issues are, and that's both from the public side and also from the developer side. How do we actually make density bonus projects attractive? How do we provide the right incentives to make developers like yourselves want to use this program and make the program work for you and for the community? So there's a whole background research and outreach phase, which is what we're in right now. We're touching base with Planning Commission and Council as well. We've already had a public meeting. We have the online survey, as I mentioned. So we're trying to get as much input as we can before we start setting out, exploring recommendations and providing them to the city, which will be the next step. And then it'll finally sort of culminate in a white paper with the specific recommendations, and then we can move to the actual ordinance drafting and adoption process after that. So this is BAE slide. Big component of this, you can come up, big component of this is making sure that we're sort of ground truthing everything that we're going to be recommending, and so we have them on board to check the financials.
Oh, here, I'll leave that with you. Hi, I'm Stephanie Hager. I'm a vice president at BAE Urban Economics. We're a 32-year-old urban economics and real estate advisory consulting firm. We're headquartered here in the Bay Area. We do a lot of work on real estate market analysis, affordable and workforce housing, public-private partnerships, and development feasibility testing is also another one of our key practice areas, and one that will come into play with our main task here for the City of Walnut Creek's Density Bonus Ordinance update. So we do this type of work for a lot of different kinds of projects. Sometimes this comes into play when we are working on a specific plan and we're helping a city to figure out whether or not the type of development that they want to see is something that would be attractive to a developer. We do a lot of highest and best use analysis, trying to figure out the value of a potential site. In this case, what we're looking at is also similar to work that we've done for a lot of other cities, where we're looking at whether or not potential development incentives and concessions that the city might offer will make a project attractive to a developer in order to help to incentivize development that would produce affordable housing. So what we have up here is my attempt at a flow chart showing what our static pro forma analysis will look for this project. So I won't go through every step of this, but the basic idea is that we'll be looking at some prototype development programs that will include both some percentage of affordable units and also development concessions. We'll come up with an asset value based on that development program, looking at what the NOI of a project like that might look like, and applying a cap rate to that. And then from there, we'll take out the development costs and come up with what your residual land value might be for a project that looks like some of these development prototypes. We'll compare that residual land value both to some recent sales in the city, and then also we'll be comparing that to a project that would be developed at the base level density, so that we can get a sense of whether or not there is additional value created by that density bonus project that makes it worthwhile for somebody to try to pursue that project. So ideally, in the density bonus scenario, we'll see a residual land value that will be higher than what you might see under the base level density. And we can talk about all of that in more detail. Just wanted to give you a quick overview for now, but we're happy to discuss if you have questions or suggestions for us on this.
Thank you. Perfect. So diving right in, brief primer on density bonus. The basic principle here obviously is by providing these contributions to housing issues within a base project, the state law currently states you could be eligible for additional density bonuses and associated concessions, incentives, and then waivers and reductions that follow after that for the physical standards. That's the basic premise of density bonus. And we're certainly working within that, making sure that we're consistent with state law, but all those little components in there, what is an eligible project, what is the amount of the bonus, how do we structure the incentives, the concessions, all of those things are up for discussion. We'd like to hear from you. How do we make those better? How do we make them more effective? How do we make them address the kind of pinch points that you're seeing as you try to put a project through this process? Here's a quick slide. I'm not going to linger here, but it's a summary of density bonus in case we do end up wanting to get into some of the numbers and how that current state structure is set up. We can dive in, but I just wanted to highlight, so the basic process of going through with BMR units as your eligibility criteria, 5% very low income will get you the minimum 20% density bonus, and then any 1% above the 5 is going to get you 2.5 extra. This is kind of the basic premise, again, under state law. Current ordinance in Walnut Creek is, for the most part, aligned with state law, despite the changes that happen. There are a few nuances built in to address some local issues. Those are just the plus signs, so these are kind of tagged on to what's already in state law. There are some areas that are explicitly not in line with state law since these last changes, and this is the kind of housekeeping that we'll be doing. But I did want to make sure that this message got out. So right now, or previously, the city did not consider units provided for the inclusionary requirement as contributing to density bonus. That's been corrected within the inclusionary ordinance. It's been corrected in state law that they have to count for both, and current practice in the city is that they count for both. So just want to make sure that that message got out there. That's effective today without any of the work that we're involved with. So leading up to this, some of the background research we've done is trying to understand what kind of density bonus projects are taking place right now in Walnut Creek, and there aren't many. This is why we're trying to figure out ways to improve the program and make it more attractive. But some of the things that we're seeing, these are mostly 100% affordable projects. The density bonus amount that is being requested, some of them are taking advantage of the local ordinance, which allows going above 35% if you're a majority affordable project. We're seeing some information about the kinds of concessions that are routinely asked for. And we're seeing some information about the types of projects, the types of units that are going in. So obviously this raises some questions. How do we try to incentivize other kinds of housing needs to get addressed? How do we streamline this process? If these concessions are routinely asked for, then could we make that process easier, more predictable? There's a lot of little questions that come up through this, and you'll see this in the discussion questions we have. We took a look at some surveys that were done, pretty broad audience. Yes?
Quick question, just logistical. For those who might want this, is it possible that you could shoot me over a copy of the PowerPoint and then I could send it out to the list?
Yeah,
afterwards?
absolutely. You can get this.
All right, great.
So no need to take copious notes here. Some survey data trying to tell us what it is that the community is looking to receive from the housing side. What kind of housing units and what is their type and nature. Obviously, when we look at this community need, we want to ask you, the providers, what would you maybe need in order to try and target these needs? So we're seeing definitely a lot of talk about family-sized units. When we look up at the makeup of those survey respondents and how big their families were, roughly half are in the 2 to 3 family range. A third is in the 3 and 4 person range. We know that there's a greater need for rentals, but certainly a large chunk is interested in owner. This is just some community sentiment about whether or not we have enough housing or not. It's about a 50-50 split between those that say there's not enough and more than enough. So I think generally there is a desire for more housing. I won't linger here on some of these numbers, but in case they come up in discussion, I want to make sure that we had them. These are just some updated figures on what we're talking about in terms of rents for a 2-family within the different target income levels. And here's where the city stands on housing units to date. These are this is basically our RENA report card. What our requirement is to provide at the different income levels and where we currently sit with the most up-to-date numbers in the last annual reporting. So clearly you can see the BMR section, the below market rate is obviously not as great as we'd like to see it. But certainly there's also a need for trying to bring this number up as well. So, which is why density bonus is so attractive. We're kind of getting both if we can get the incentives right and we can structure it right to work for you. So that's all the preamble I wanted to provide, and jump right into the discussion and open the floor. We have a few kind of cues as definite information that we want to get, but by all means you can jump right into the issues that are relevant to you. If we don't have to follow this rigid sort of structure. We have this mic, which I'll pass around, and we have another one kind of maybe treated to the two sides of the room. Yeah. The first one we had, and I'll preamble this with, again, reiterating our key interest from this audience is, how do we get the incentives right? How do we identify the issues that you're seeing that maybe is not making density bonus attractive as an option for you? And what do we need to think about in terms of restructuring it so that it works? So that's kind of a global question for you. The first one we have is just trying to understand, again, the local issues that you're seeing and trying to bring mixed income projects to bear in Walnut Creek, or any other comments you might have on that global question. Yes, sir.
That we should say at the front.
Okay.
I've been told by.
Let's see. I had a. Is it on? Testing. Hi. My question is in relationship to the percentage of affordable housing, and if you were to mix and match like very low with moderate, and how those percentages kind of work out, where because if it's, as I understand it, very low, you provide 11%, you get the 35% bonus. But what if you mix and match with others? And so that's the basic question, and then also the process of how the state mandates it be processed through the city, and how easily that's supposed to happen. Some comments on that would be great.
Sure. So for the first question about mixing the income levels that you provide, under state law, you must select only one track. So I'm going to jump back to this table. These are all the different criteria that you could use to be eligible for density bonus. You could provide a land donation, you could target moderate income units on a for sale project, and so on. But whatever track you choose, even if you're hitting multiple of them, you pick one, and that's the one that gets you the density bonus eligibility under state law. So if you have very low units and low units, you pick the one probably that's going to give you the most bonus for the amount of units that you're providing, and the other one will not be contributing, will not be topping it up or adding to that bonus. That's under state law right now, but that's certainly something that we can consider. So if the way that you structure your projects, there is an attraction to or more feasibility in trying to hit a mix of different income levels, then that's something that we can look at within the local ordinance and tweaking it so that you can see a bonus by providing both. With the second question about processing and procedure, it's definitely up to local jurisdictions to implement and process applications. The city is not able to set up a independent process for density bonus, with its own scope of review and its own procedure of whether it goes to planning commission. It would be tied to the project, the nature of the project. So whatever your base project is and the level of review that's triggered through that, the density bonus component would be just carried through that process. It wouldn't get an extra layer of review. For example, you wouldn't need to go through council to get the density bonus approved and then go through the zoning administrator for the rest of your project. If it's a zoning administrator project, then the density bonus component would go through that, or whatever level of review it is. Any other questions or comments? Yes, right here in the blue.
A question that I have relates to the, basically, I believe in the law, it states that you have to have existing zoning in place in order to get the density bonus. So that prevents you from being able to work on a project and factor in a density bonus if you're going to provide the housing. And so I'm just wondering if that's something that's being dealt with, because it's a little bit of a conundrum.
So if I'm understanding, the site has to be ready to accommodate the base project before you can consider that. There are provisions in the state law, and I don't know the exact verbiage in there, but a general plan amendment can't be predicated on the density bonus application. And so there is that disconnect there. It's something we can look at a little bit deeper. Yeah. So I guess could you walk me through a more of an explicit example of kind of what you'd like to see?
If you're pursuing a site and it would require a general plan amendment and rezoning, and you have support for it, how do you factor in the density bonus when the law specifically states that the base or the existing zoning has to be in place before you can apply the density bonus? So I think that something needs to be addressed there so that it would open up more opportunities for the development on site of the affordable units.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other? Yes, up here.
I'm interested in understanding better how the density bonus really works in Walnut Creek relating to the height limits, and because there's some, I'm at least a little bit unclear about if density bonus can trump the height ceiling.
Okay. So the height ceiling being Measure A. So there's definitely height limits within the zoning ordinance, and then there's in Walnut Creek the Measure A condition. So my understanding, and this is still, it's very much an active process, but I think that the determination is pretty solid on the city's end that Measure A is reflected in the zoning ordinance, and as a component of the zoning ordinance, density bonus has the ability to request concessions to any of the aspects of the zoning ordinance that would contribute either to identifiable and actual cost reductions for the provision of affordable housing, or under your waivers as a physical restriction that prevents a density bonus project from being built. So as it's embedded in the zoning ordinance, it is subject to density bonus's flexibility. You would be able to apply density bonus to it.
The density bonus would allow you to exceed the Measure A height limits.
Yes, if you can justify the incentives and the waivers under the premise of density bonus, then yes.
So I guess then a follow-up question is, what's the guidance on how much?
So this is definitely something that we've talked about as this project has been evolving. You know, what is the best way to treat this? Because certainly there's a community interest in the height restrictions, and we all have to play within the realities here. What we would like to do, and what we'd like to hear from you, are ways that we can incentivize any and all options outside of targeting the height limit, so that we can reduce the amount of height that you need to exceed in the first place. Strictly speaking, from the density bonus perspective, there is no limit on what you can request, so long as it's justified within providing identifiable and actual cost reductions and posing as a physical restriction to the development, always in the purview of the provision of the affordable housing component. So it's a bit of a balancing act there, but there is no hard number that it cannot exceed. In the black in the back.
This isn't specifically related to the density bonus, but to incentivize affordable housing unit production, there's still a lot of impact fees and city fees that relate to producing affordable units that increase the cost of producing those units. If you can think about waiving those, that would help make those units a little more buildable.
Okay.
And one other thing, the requirement for storage is you've probably heard that one before, but it's really expensive to build because you have to build it usually within the garage, and we're not seeing them get used very much. So if you could maybe consider not requiring that, that would help as well.
Okay. Any others? I'm going to jump through my questions here if they sort of queue up any thoughts. Oops. So we had the general question of what are some of the headaches. This is an interesting one that I'd really like to hear about. So the state law right now provides for a 35%, up to a 35% density bonus, provided that you are eligible for it. We have heard in the past that additional density is not necessarily an incentive. It can be a challenge. It can introduce new cost factors as the building gets taller and you need to turn to different kinds of construction. I would like to hear from this group if that's something that you're seeing, that you're feeling. And if we did look at additional density as a way to try to offset that, what level of density would we potentially need to consider? How high? Any thoughts on that? Yes.
Yeah, that definitely is a factor. Depending on how small the site is, you might go from a type 5 to a type 3, and that might add 20% to your construction costs. And so, I think having flexibility around, land dedication in lieu of mixing the units within a building, sometimes that's the right solution. But sometimes you don't have that luxury of having extra land for a standalone affordable project, and therefore figuring out ways to mix it. And the other challenge is, if depending on the number of total affordable units that you come up with, that changes the strategy. Like some of the examples in here were 10% in a 100% project, and that's 10 units, or 20 units in a 100% 100-unit project. As you start to get up to 40 units or more, that becomes a project of its own in some regards, that can be financed with tax credits and with local funding, and that brings other challenges like prevailing wage for the entire project, perhaps if the units are mixed together. And so I think it's being creative around how the density bonus is applied to different situations, and also maybe pushing the envelope on what if it is a 40-60 split or a 50-50 split, and how do we create more market rate and tax credit financed mixed income projects.
Any thoughts on that, on addressing some of those issues? And we've definitely heard about the financing in other stakeholder groups, the challenge of bringing in a mixed income project and having complete dispersal of the lower income units with the market rate units, and trying to get that bundle packaged versus a standalone BMR project or BMR structure that could be kind of parceled out and have its own financing structure. Any thoughts on that question, and trying to bring those two together?
I would concur that if there is a way that you can segment the flow of money, because they are kind of two different purposes. You can, get some grants or whatnot from different sources than you would on the market rate units. And then maybe if things are put into like a master plan situation, you can kind of divide them up. I know it says you have to have an even mix, but if it was an even mix within a larger plan, then I think that segregation would help get things done, rather than trying to intermix them all and have a BMR unit next to a luxury condo. That's just it's not good for either in the end, because you might not be able to get the project done.
Thank you. Other thoughts?
It is. It's just, sorry, we're recording this so that it's available, and so it goes to it doesn't always go through the room. Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah, it is, but it doesn't get around the room quite as well. It just gets mostly on the recording. So.
Yeah, if people could speak up anyways, even though you're holding the mic, go ahead and speak up.
Did I see a hand in the back there too, ma'am?
Oh, sorry. Let me.
Did you have a question as well, or comment? No. Okay.
One is just a clarification. So, if you receive one concession for whatever group you're in, I see the columns of concessions and waivers. Is that just a distinction of how it's applied? It's really, you could call them both concessions, or what's the differentiation?
Yeah, it's a good and subtle question. They are two different things. They may have the same effect, but they are two different things, and they're meant to serve different purposes. So the incentives/concessions is a category that there are a limited number of, and it's based on how many, under state law, it's based on how many below market rate units that you're providing, or other contributions that you're providing to be eligible. It ranges from 1 to 3, depending on the amount that you're providing. Those incentives and concessions are meant to be used to reduce or offset the costs associated with affordable housing. that is their intended purpose. And as I said, there's a max of 3 right now that you could potentially have. Waivers and reductions are unlimited in number, and their purpose is, once we have a density bonus proposal, you have a base project, you have your qualifying units or qualifying contribution to get the density bonus, you have the density bonus factored in, you have a project designed, you have the concessions built in, that project is what it is. If there are any physical restrictions that prevent that project from being built within the local standards, whether they be setbacks, height, floor area, any physical conditions set through the local regulations that would prevent that project, those can be requested through the waivers and reductions. So the difference there is, one needs to be linked to offsetting costs for affordable housing, the other needs to be linked to physically preventing the development from happening. It's a bit of a strategic choice which one you want to use in order to get what you need in order to make that project move forward. And so that's an area where staff really comes in to shine, I think, as a partner in this, in talking through, what is the best way to structure it, what is the best way to look at this, so that we can get the project moving.
Would it be wrong to categorize the waiver as more of a discretionary item?
Less of a discretionary item.
Okay.
They're both have the same rubric staff needs to use, except that the incentives are a little bit more discretionary because they have the added component of being linked to offsetting cost. So that's a little bit more of a gray area than does this physically prevent a development.
And then just 2 more things. One, just to comment on what you said last. I mean, from a small developer, we build 10 to 50 units in a building, and everybody knows the median price of anything is 1.2 or 1.3 million if it has any decent size. And what we've really been challenged with, not just in Walnut Creek, but in other cities up and down the 680 corridor, is just being able to fit something in with that priced unit is always a challenge. And we can get the bedroom count correct and we can get different things correct, but with costs going up, I'm selling one unit for 1.2. The cost of the affordable unit is still the same, and I've still got a garage and parking spaces and everything else. So really the hit becomes really big on what I can sell that for. I'm doing for sale. So to look at how we can, I know there's a social argument for sure, and it's always been there, and I don't think it's ever been concluded it should be in the unit, it shouldn't. But I think when the city decided to move its numbers up for an in lieu fee from 12 to 26 or whatever it was back, gosh, this was a long time ago, but that really opened up a lot of sites for us. And if you go back and look at those sites, I think that the money that we contributed to the in lieu allowed for Trinity Center and other things that you can see, these beautiful projects that are being built with people who know exactly what they're doing versus me, who, I know what I'm doing for sale, but this is, I'm not an expert at, affordable housing. So I try my best, we team with people, but I just think that's something that should really be looked at, so that the experts can use the money. We're not looking to shirk our responsibility but I think that really should be looked at. And then that's a comment. But the last question is if you do have inconsistencies, and let's say I bring an application in, how is that going to be handled? And I'm not saying you do, other cities do. And if an application is in and it's deemed complete and it's coming before one of the bodies, how do you handle that? Does from what I understand, state law governs, period. And clearly you want to work with staff and the city attorney to try to clean it up. But how are you currently handling those things if you do have it? Because there will be inconsistencies. The state's going to change again, and then you're going to be moving again. So
right.
just a philosophy from the city, or if it's just black and white state stands.
Sure, definitely staff's input here. I mean, you're right. I'll tackle the first part of the question, and then so I think your comment about the looking at partnerships or looking at how the private market side can contribute to the BMR side as a separate, through in-lieux. That's something that's come up. It's something, love to hear from the group again if that's something that would work. there's clearly a direction and a desire here to try to get on-site construction. And so, that's there. But certainly we can look at what else might be contributing to housing in Walnut Creek. I do think, and we talked about this very briefly, about the idea of direct partnerships between market rate and below market rate happening in tandem. And right now under state law, there isn't a provision that allows for that, to recognize, for example, a bonus on the market rate side because they've partnered with a BMR developer on a separate site altogether. There is that relationship between a non-residential development and partnered with a BMR project. So that's something that we can look at, and if anyone has any comments about that relationship and whether that's feasible or attractive, I'd love to hear about that. And then Margot, if you want to tackle the second part of it.
I mean, you can answer. You probably
Sure.
would give the same answer I would give.
Okay.
I'll jump up.
So if you don't like what I say, then yeah. Implementation is on the local end, is on staff's end, but you're right. State law would prevail. So if state law does change after this ordinance is adopted, then whatever that change happens to be has to be followed through and carried through, and it would be up to staff and it would be their responsibility to make sure that that's happening. So I think hopefully that answers, yeah. Any other? Yes, sir. Here.
Thanks for giving me exercise.
One of the questions I have is when you're looking at units, and let's say if you had 20 units and you're going to do affordable and moderate or low, and it's what goes in the unit. So when, like Dan was saying, you're talking about a $1.3 million unit. Once you're in that price bracket, you have certain finishes and things like that, and because you're selling $1 million one, and now you're looking at low moderate units. And so we have always faced the problem is that you always want to duplicate exactly what's in the 1.4 million in the affordable. And so all of a sudden you may have hardwood floors or it could be home automation and things like that. And the policy, and I'm not sure if it's still that way, they said, well, you need to put the same thing in, and obviously it's thousands of dollars. Has that changed at all, or do you have a variance where you work with the city that say, look, this is affordable unit, and we're going to have a certain type of appliance range and not maybe the high end? Is that happening, or is it still the old way of doing it?
So within state law, there isn't a ton of nuance to the match between BMR and market. There is some discussion about size, but it's not a hard line. The way that the city's been interpreting that or applying that is, I have this on the slide with some of the augments to state law that we currently have. There is flexibility recognized right now about the size. There's a plus minus 30% allowance within the local requirement. So if your average unit size was 1,200 square feet for market rate, you can be plus minus 30% on the BMR units. There is a requirement for interdispersion, so you're not consolidating all of the BMR units. But again, that's something that we'd want to talk about. And there is a third, I believe, about the timing that the BMR units would need to be phased in. There isn't anything explicit about fixtures and interiors, as far as I'm aware now, but
We do. Under our inclusionary ordinance, we do have a section on certain incentives, and one of the incentives that we provide under the inclusionary ordinance is that you can have some different finishes, some different interior. It's more about quality, so we need to make sure that it is still good quality, but we do allow some concessions that would result in cost reductions on the BMR units, and I'm assuming we would apply that if the affordable units were also used to get the density bonus, but I don't think we explicitly state that in the ordinance, so it's something we can talk about when we're talking about drafting the new ordinance.
let's go here first and then.
Oh, sorry.
Dovetailing to his question, putting when we are affordable ownership developers, and we love to partner with the market rate developers, and we come across a couple of hurdles always. One is that we like to have the BMR units in one place within the development. Now they have to be mixed, and the market rate developers, it doesn't work in a production sense to mix them. We just have to be separated. And that's something that ordinance can look into to see if they can allow that. Second is that the when the two developers can collaborate, it should be an additional incentive. So market rate developers would like to collaborate with us and partner with us, okay, and allow that. So I know the state doesn't require that, but that would be something that you could look into.
So just to make sure everyone caught the comments, I think this is a representative from affordable housing developer ownership, talking about the partnerships between market rate and below market rate, talking about a desire to see more partnership. There is a desire on your end to have consolidation of the units, which I think dovetails with what the market rate developers would probably want to see, potentially want to see. And then there's a need to recognize the incentives that would need to be provided in order to get those partnerships to be more attractive to the market rate side. So just want to make sure. If anyone has comments on that, that'd be great. So we'll go here and then turn over to you, sir.
So I'm also an affordable housing nonprofit developer, and just for my education, I'm interested. When we do 100% affordable, we are regulated on so many levels in our reporting. We have compliance departments, and so we know that that's part of our basic core business, is making sure that the people that we're renting to are income eligible, and the rents that we're charging are within the regulation. When an affordable unit is developed as part of a larger market rate development, how is the city monitoring, and especially on home ownership? I have no idea how that works. That's part of, I guess, my concern. Certainly, we would like to be, we know how to use inclusionary funds to develop 100% affordable, and we deliver that that regulatory compliance in perpetuity. How are the market rate developments able to manage that, and how is the city able to monitor that the affordability is continuing to be delivered?
So we, there was a long period of time where we did not allow inclusionary rental units, and so we have very few inclusionary rental units that are not in 100% affordable projects, but we do have some, and those are from the city's end. They're monitored in the same way, so they fill out the same reports that you guys fill out. We do occasionally do on-site monitoring, so checking the files, but we don't have a large housing staff, so that's certainly not something that we're doing every year, and we're certainly not doing every project. So there's, we lose the monitoring leverage that we get on the 100% affordable, where there's multiple monitoring agencies, right? So when you have an affordable project, you're funded by the city and the county and tax credits, and there's different entities monitoring the same units. And so there's more likelihood that someone's going to be on site, is going to check the files, that if there's violations, those are going to be caught than you would have necessarily with the inclusionary. But we do monitor them the same way. On the ownership side, the income qualification is only a one-time income qualification, so you don't have to income qualify once you've purchased a unit. You don't have to continue to income qualify. You can become over income, and that doesn't disqualify you from continuing to own the unit. The primary qualification that we monitor for on ownership units is owner occupancy, and so we do that annually with all of our BMR ownership units, where the owners have to certify that they are continuing to reside there as their primary place of residence. Remain they typically have a 45-year resale restriction. So the only way that the affordability is lifted, and that 45 years starts over every time the unit resales. So it's like if they sell it within that 45 years, it's sold at a below market rate price that is set by the city, and a qualified applicant has to buy it. The resale restriction may be lifted under a couple scenarios. One is if they own it for 45 years. It does go away. If the market, if there's a major shift in the market such that the BMR price ends up being kind of close or similar to the market rate price, we sometimes lose the resale restriction because it's not possible to sell it with the resale restriction. And that has happened, actually, surprisingly. It wouldn't happen now, and it's hard to imagine, but it has happened, so.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so wanted to just kind of ask about, I think, from the market rate side, two of the more visceral hurdles that occur to us when we're considering, inclusion or sort of affordable units as a component of a market rate project. The first one is, how do we actually just administer this and comply with it? And what impact may that have on, residual values when someone who we may be selling to is thinking about, is this as simple as it looks, or am I stepping into a headache? I think we started to get into that with her question. Then the second one, which has come up a couple of times, even in some of your slides, is there's this perceived stigma, maybe saying, of mixing market rate and below market rate units. And I think one of the fears is that there may be an impact on the market rate units and the desirability and who's my neighbor. But I'm not actually sure that is a real concern in practice. And by way of example, when we were looking at one project here in Walnut Creek, we were talking to Kaiser. They have a lot of workers who I think would probably qualify for some of these below market rate units. And these are the kind of people that, you'd never know if they're right next to the market rate units. You'd never know. And there's a lot of really good reasons why you'd actually want, people who are working close by to be occupying these units. So I guess this is kind of a broad question, but has the city thought about BMR in recasting it as workforce housing? There's a couple of specific groups of employees, city employees, teachers, first responders, policemen. There's all sorts of, sort of other classifications that aren't necessarily BMR that I think, if there's a little bit more education, some more case studies on how this all works, it might make it more palatable for market rate developers.
Yeah, if you want to.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. So we're actually in the middle of a big outreach campaign around affordable housing, which Ann Wong, our assistant planner in the back, she's been spearheading that. And it's been a really successful campaign. And one of our goals in that is to really have a lot of education in the community about what affordable housing is, who it serves, how it benefits the community. Workforce housing and affordable housing are oftentimes interchangeable, at least loosely interchangeable when we talk about it. But one of my concerns about kind of just adopting a workforce housing as the principal identifier is that it actually excludes a lot of people in the community who really need affordable housing, for example, seniors or people who may be disabled and not in the workforce or receiving public benefits. And so affordable housing has like a broader application, and it really addresses the broad need in the community. But we do talk about workforce housing, and certainly that is a component. That's a big component of why we need the affordable housing, and the workforce is a huge percentage of the people who come into the affordable housing, so we certainly do talk about it. Workforce housing, from my understanding, is also not clearly defined in terms of income ranges, and so with affordable housing, we have some very specific state-defined kind of income categories that fits into. So I guess those are my only comments. But I do think that our public outreach campaign that we're doing, the education campaign, has been really successful in getting some good dialogue in the community about affordable housing, about who it benefits and how it benefits the community. So I feel like that's one of our great accomplishments this past year. Yeah.
Question for you in thinking about this. It sounds like there's this public outreach campaign that's been going community-wide.
Mm-hmm.
Are you also saying that this is something that could or should be targeted or tools given to developers or people who are actually tenanting these buildings and selling the units? And could you talk a little bit about what that might look like?
I think it could be as simple as giving more clarity towards, the community developers about who typically qualifies for these BMR units. I think just even defining what that is. Workforce housing, I think, is easier to understand because it's descriptive. And I'm not saying that's just one example. When we hear below market rate housing, I think what people hear is people who, for whatever reason, can't afford the market rate, and there's a stigma that goes with that. So I think even just providing a bullet point of 10 or 15 typical categories of types of people who occupy these units would go a long ways towards maybe reversing some of the stigma that's associated with that. Because I think if you hear seniors, disabled people, whatever it is, that's a lot easier for people to understand and a lot less scary.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think we certainly will be doing some of that as we go through the public hearing process. So we'll keep that in mind and include some of that.
Here, I'll go here and then I'll come back.
That's a good point, but one of the things that I have faced, and they often give identification to workforce and the police officers, the firemen, and the teachers, and when you really talk to the police, and I've talked to the Walnut Creek Police, is we don't qualify. We make too much money. And the teachers, they're usually married and they're professional. They don't qualify. It's, so we throw out these names, and then you say, if you look at income, and it's a family unit, they just don't qualify. So obviously, when we look at affordable units, seniors are absolutely one of the ones that qualifies, and so that's one group, and then some young people that just starting out. So I'm always cautious about throwing names, because when you do a deep dive and you find out, wait a minute, these people do not qualify. The second point is that you brought up a good thing is, and I live in a condominium, and all of a sudden, the monthly homeowners dues, and I'm not sure exactly how you deal with owner occupied for affordable unit, where we had a homeowners meeting and we didn't have earthquake, and the group says, look, we want earthquake, so it bumped the homeowners due $60 a month. So what happens to the person that was affordable, and all of a sudden now I have a $60, or maybe the property taxes were under 13 has gone away and it's going to be reevaluated. How do you handle that? Because you qualify them to buy it, but how about the homeowners dues?
Yeah, Margot, if you want to talk about the second part, I do want to just raise a couple of points that are on my slides about this question of you have too much income to buy a market rate unit, but not little enough to qualify. And that's an interesting little wedge that we would like to talk a bit about with you. Right now, under state law, there is no density bonus associated with moderate income rental units. It's just not provided at all. It's something that we've talked about internally, whether that's a need. So certainly from the group, if you think that that's a market that could be served. And that dovetails with another question that I have. It's both in the survey and on these slides about the feasibility or the attractiveness of deeper affordability with fewer units as your requirement, or less affordability but more units, and where that balance sits and whether it changes with the unit type. So I'd love for you to fill out the surveys if you haven't already online. It gives us really interesting, good feedback. If you can take a minute to do that, you'll see these questions on there. But to be transparent about what we're trying to get at here is the questions really relate to, if we're talking about one-bedroom units in a project, which one seems more feasible to you, or which one would just on the face of it seem more attractive, all else being equal? 10 units at what is equivalent to a very low rate, or 20 units at what's equivalent to a low category? And then does that change with unit type? If we were looking at family size units in the same spread, 10 family size units at the low rate, so this has gone up because there's more household members, versus 20 units of the same, or 20 units of the same unit type and the associated rate at the low income level. You know, I've provided numbers just so we can dive right into it, and I'm not sure if that's the way you guys want to think about these things, but the general question here is, where is that balance? What's more attractive to you? What's more feasible to you? Lower with deeper affordability, lower number of units, or more units with less affordability? And if we start introducing the moderate category, you know, what are you guys seeing? What are you thinking? What would be feasible? And then Margot, if you want to tackle that other question.
Oh, yeah, just real briefly, you know, on the affordable for sale, they qualify just like anybody else would for financing. So once they've gotten into the unit, yeah, if the HOA dues go up, they'll pay the higher dues, and they may be able to absorb it because over time their income has likely also gone up. In terms of Prop 13, I have no idea what would happen. That would be hard even for people not in BMRs if suddenly what their tax obligation like changed dramatically. But I think in the, HOA, yeah, they have sometimes gone up.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Oh, and then we had a hand up over there as well. So 1, 2, and then 3.
I don't have an answer for that. It's too complicated. And I don't mean that facetiously. This whole thing is too complicated. So you clearly have people with intent that want to do the right thing. I'm a terrible for sale developer, but I would like to do the right thing somehow. It's very difficult. I don't do 100-unit projects, so I'm just everything through my lens is just smaller projects, which I think cities need and probably staff likes to see every once in a while instead of these massive things happening. But I think you have to look at all of it. My general thing, I'm going through it right now, and I'm going for the state exemption. I'm not going to say where, but probably right in the heart of darkness. But it's so it's going to be challenged all over the place. And I think the key thing is probably flexibility on the staff's part. So that's why I asked about the waivers and things like that. You have a really, really strong staff here. And what it takes to build a building, there's 5,000 variables. And so to ask a question like this, I could say, I can get back to you in like a month and I'll have all the data and maybe I could be able to give you an answer. But that applies to when you said the city is willing to do 30% less in square footage, or why not 50? Why not 70? And provide a unit. Allow me to build these units. Help me do that. Some of the other things, just along with the in lieu fee, those are the types of things that if I look at a project of 40 units and the dispersal, I've got 4 stories and it's geometry. If I have smaller units, they all have to be stacked. So is that dispersed? Is that not dispersed? They're all on the left-hand side of the building. So those are all, to take your point, those are all the BMRs over there. We're doing something right now that they're all on the first floor. We have a 3-story building. It's not even close. The upper story ones are 2,000 square foot units. The smaller ones are 900 square foot units. They are going to have the same finishes, but they're on the first floor and they're accessible and will be adaptable for people with disabilities, because that's what we've heard from the organizations that need this housing. We just went to them and they said, don't build us a 2,000 square foot unit. This is a veteran coming back. He's got a child and his wife. Get a 2-bedroom and he'll be in this for a little while. He gets on his feet. He's going to sell it and move on. So the flexibility, if you really want to solve it, it's got to have some internal flexibility so I can sit with staff and go, here's why. They can still say, I'm not going to advocate for that. But I can say, this is what. This is going to get you 3 units. I can actually build my building, and we're going to get 3 great units. And I agree with you. I don't think it's going to be this thing where, oh, boy, those are the homeless veterans. It doesn't work that way. These people are in our community already. So that's just my, I would say flexibility on the staff's part.
Still want to talk about the microphone?
We come at this from a little different angle than most people. We consult with condominium associations, and let's just say have reached the end of their service life and are looking to redevelop their property. And we have a couple that we're working with now. a lot of them are close in, near downtown. They're not necessarily reached their existing density limits, but I have a question and sort of a request. The question is, a lot of the occupants of these units would qualify as low-income, senior, even disabled. So they're already there. If they're already there and the idea is to partner up with the community association and redevelop the project into something higher and better use, more units, newer units, upgraded, whatever it takes, but service the same population that's already there. Do they count toward density bonus?
Yeah, I think we talked about this a little bit briefly. The project, I think that you were describing to me then and now, it would be a density bonus, potentially a density bonus project. If we're talking about taking an existing building, same number of units, and just sort of freshening it up, that's a bit of a different thing versus taking a building, expanding it, adding more units, potentially butting up against the density limits and other potential standards that might apply.
Yeah.
That seems to be something that would definitely be eligible for density bonus. You have to remember within density bonus, and this is all state law, and it was dramatically expanded in this last set of revisions, is the replacement unit requirements. So long as you're providing everything you would need in order to be eligible for density bonus under the basic premise of it, and also providing for the replacement of existing units that are at affordable rents, whether that's by deed restrictions or not, then certainly you'd be eligible.
And the request is, we're looking for some development partners in these projects who potentially a nonprofit or low-income housing developer who would be interested in working with these community associations to partner up and redevelop their projects. So if there's anybody in this room who sort of fits that category who's interested, come talk to me.
Ownership or rental? Ownership or rental?
Ownership, most likely, although 50% of these units are already rented by investors, so it's kind of a mixed bag at this point.
So we're hitting right at 9 o'clock right now. I don't see anyone running for the door, so it seems like we might have a little flexibility if we want to take. I definitely have one more question with an arm raised, a second one. If everyone's comfortable with it and if we have the time in the room, I'd love to take those. Can we go here first? I think he was. Sorry. Yep.
I just had a clarifying question about a comment made earlier on incomes, specifically like police officers, teachers. I've built housing for teachers, and so there are, within the district, you will find a good portion of teachers that are either employees of the district or early teachers, for example, that will qualify for affordable housing. Same with police officers. I mean, if you have a long tenure and you're higher salary, then yes, absolutely, you're overqualified. Or if you're a household that has 2 teachers, perhaps, in the household, 2 income earners, that would make you overqualified. But really looking into the details, the tax credits now can serve up to 80% AMI, and so there's more opportunities for serving that workforce. I was talking to our police officers, 16% can afford to live in Walnut Creek right now. How do we, cut down on those commutes? It's important to tackle these types of things. And then on the homeownership side, I think there's even more opportunity to serve the workforce, because in that case, you can go up, in some cases, to 120% AMI. And even on the peninsula, sometimes even higher. I've seen up to 160% AMI in Menlo Park. That's subsidized. And so, I think, fire officers, yes, they make more, but it definitely, there's opportunities to serve that workforce.
And then up at the front.
A couple of points on feedback with respect to the question about, is there an unserved, group of people that are, overqualified for BMR income levels but can't really afford market rate? Absolutely. I think that's a huge portion of the market, which maybe leads me into the second point, which is that, with construction costs where they are right now, a lot of residential projects, and I'd say probably most residential projects, mainly on the rental side, really don't pencil. So in response to one of the questions somewhere, which is, do we need to do more? My feeling is that a lot of the rules that we're talking about right now were kind of hatched during, a period in the market where residential development was kind of, going crazy and the numbers all worked, and that doesn't happen anymore. So I think that, yes, if you're thinking about being more aggressive about these things, and, whether that's more density beyond 35%, whatever it is you can do, I think that if you really want this to take root and be put into practice in the next 3 years or so, you're going to have to be more aggressive. And then just, one bit of feedback, we did the math on one project in Walnut Creek just to see what would be favored, and the numbers, at least in our case, favored fewer units with a lower income level. So, for what it's worth.
Thank you. Yes, we can take the questions, but Matt and Stephanie, if you guys had any specific questions, anything you'd love to hear, numbers that would be helpful, let me know and we can make sure we ask the group.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for being here and sharing your thoughts. I think, there we go. Thank you, Stephanie. I think we're going to have some pretty specific questions getting into the financial feasibility calculations for projects. So rather than try to get into those details at this hour, what we're hoping is as we reach out to individuals who are knowledgeable about construction costs, development costs within the area, that some folks might share with us some of their facts and figures from specific projects and so forth, so we can kind of take that into our model building process.
One thing that occurs to me thinking about that moderate income middle that's kind of getting priced out of the current crazy prices, but definitely doesn't qualify for the affordable housing, the low and very low, is I do wonder if right now, at least while we're in this economic cycle, in a very desirable place like Walnut Creek, that there could be the local inclusionary could give an incentive for creating a higher allocation towards moderate income or workforce income levels, where it's not 10 or 20%, but 45% or something like that, where maybe the rest is luxury prices, but then you have a very much higher moderate income component, where the affordable housing developers, we can't serve that moderate income, the 80 to 120% of area median income. So that's not just a space that we're in, but that could be an important piece of the affordable housing solution for that missing middle in Walnut Creek. That's just an idea, and that this may only last for a certain number of years until the economics calm down a little bit, but for now it actually could help a lot.
I know I saw Reed. Did you still, and then I'll come back to you.
Thank you. Just a quick question on the implementation side. So if I got a piece of property, and where does the percentage of the bonus start? It's like, because applying that density bonus, and I've been in situations in some cities where they, you come in with a project and then they say, oh, you can do this density bonus, and then they try to apply the bonus requirements or the requirements on the density, the extra units they put in there. And so you get in this kind of circular, reference, if you will, of that you can't come up with a number. It's hard to negotiate a number. And so to know kind of like the carrying capacity or the baseline, or a suggested one perhaps, because it is kind of difficult, every parcel is different, to know that, okay, this is kind of, okay, it is 100 units, you're going to get 35, and those 35 are going to be treated differently. You're not going to, have to go include those in certain either fees, could be a break in fees or other incentives to keep those 35 as part of the project. But what is the baseline when the application comes in? I guess that's the question.
The baseline, that's one of the updates that happened to state law, because we're seeing that practice that you're talking about. So it's very explicit now. The baseline must be the base project before density bonus units are applied. You do not use the density bonus units as what you calculate the percentage on. So if you're putting forward a 50-unit project, that's your market rate project. If you're going 11% very low, 11% of 50, and then you'd get your 35% density bonus units on top of the 50. But that 11% would be based on the 50. Well, you'd have to sketch out your density, your project, your final project, but you'd have to identify what's your base project, and that number of units would be the units that you'd use to calculate your density bonus requirement.
I'll add one thing to that. We do our inclusionary ordinance the inclusionary requirement does apply to the whole project, so not just the base project. Our inclusionary percentages are much lower than the density bonus qualifying percentages, so it rarely triggers additional units. But the affordable requirement for density bonus only applies to the base. It isn't then added on, which is I think what you said. And I think we have time for one more, and we can probably stay after.
I wanted to second her comment and Iman's comment. We're at Habitat. We have a lot of people coming to our doors, teachers, some policemen, and they're missing middle. That we tend to service folks under 80 AMI, but there are a lot of people coming through that are between 80 and 120 AMI, which moderate, and we're starting to actually serve them. We're starting to change our parameters to be able to serve them, and the huge number of them that are coming through, and I wanted to know if you can consider in your density bonus to give leverage to moderate and serving moderates, and whether it is ownership or rental, whatever that might be, but that's serving those families.
Thank you. So I think we've got to head out. Well, we can talk.
We need to sort of formally close, but we can still stay. The room's not used. Yeah, so we can stay and get more feedback.
Okay. So with that, again, thank you all for taking a little bit of time. I hope you had a chance to fill out those surveys, or if you don't now, fill them out and drop them off with the city or online as well. You can find the survey. But again, thank you for your input.